You're listening to KFUG LP Crescent City, 101.1 FM and online, kfugradio.org. It's just past noon. Time now for KFUG Community News. In today's newscast, the Del Norte Board of Supervisors okayed the Repeal Measure R initiative for the November ballot. Oregon senators move to secure the North Fork of the Smith River. And CalMatters reports on the state of the state's renters ahead of relaxed eviction and rent hike regulations. And the Humboldt Crabs are kicking butt. All that plus national native news and our regular segments from the Pacifica Radio Network. We begin with national and international headlines from Democracy Now!'s Amy Goodman.
The Washington Post reporting the Justice Department's investigating former President Trump as part of its criminal probe into efforts to overturn the 2020 election. As part of the probe, prosecutors have reportedly received phone records of key officials within Trump's circle, including his former chief of staff, Mark Meadows. The Post also revealed 2 aides to former Vice President Mike Pence, his chief of staff, Mark Short, and lawyer Greg Jacob recently testified before a grand jury. On Tuesday, Attorney General Merrick Garland spoke to Lester Holt on NBC's Nightly News. Garland refused to rule out charging Donald Trump.
We intend to hold anyone who was criminally responsible for the events surrounding January 6th, for any attempt to interfere with the lawful transfer of power from one administration to another, accountable. That's what we do. We don't pay any attention to other issues with respect to that.
So if Donald Trump were to become a candidate for president again, that would not change your schedule or how you move forward or don't move forward?
I'll say again that we will hold accountable anyone who was criminally responsible for attempting to interfere with the legitimate, lawful transfer of power from one administration to the next.
Part of the Justice Department probes reportedly focused on an effort by Trump's team to submit fake electors who would claim to the Electoral College Trump had won states where he'd actually lost. On Tuesday, the New York Times revealed details of internal emails sent by lawyers working on this effort. In one email, the Arizona-based lawyer Jack Wilenchik described the plan as, quote, kind of wild, creative. He wrote, quote, we would just be sending in fake electoral votes to Pence so that someone in Congress can make an objection when they start counting votes and start arguing that the fake votes should be counted, unquote. In a follow-up email, he wrote, quote, alternative votes is probably a better term than fake votes. He then added a smiley face emoji to the email. In related news, the House January 6th committee has released an audio clip from testimony by former acting Defense Secretary Christopher Miller. He denied Trump ever gave a formal order to have 10,000 troops ready to be deployed to the Capitol on January 6, 2021, a claim that's been made by former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows and others. In the clip, Miller was questioned by Committee Vice Chair Liz Cheney.
To be crystal clear, there was no direct order from President Trump to put 10,000 troops to be on the ready for January 6th, correct?
No. That's correct. There was no order from the president.
On Tuesday, Donald Trump gave his first speech in Washington since leaving office. He hinted he may run for president again. Oregon Governor Kate Brown has declared a state of emergency in 25 counties due to a scorching heat wave in the Pacific Northwest. In Portland, temperatures reached 102 degrees Fahrenheit Tuesday, breaking a new daily record, which had been set just 2 years ago. Forecasts show temperatures could rise above 110 degrees Fahrenheit in eastern Washington later this week. Meanwhile, in Missouri, at least one person has died in massive flooding after more than 9 inches of rain fell in the St. Louis region. The storm broke a century-old record and came after a period when the region was experiencing an extended drought. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, at least 15 people have died after a series of protests targeting UN troops who have been stationed in Congo since 1999. On Monday, protesters in the city of Goma stormed the headquarters of the UN peacekeeping force known as MONUSCO. Some UN personnel had to be airlifted to safety. In a separate incident, one UN peacekeeper from Morocco and 2 UN police officers from India were killed in the city of Butembo. Protesters have accused the United Nations of failing to protect civilians from attacks by various armed groups in the region.
They are tear gassing us because we came to say that MONUSCO does not help us. They've been in Congo for 22 years and nothing works. We came to demand our rights, but they shoot us with tear gas.
Russia has announced it plans to withdraw from the International Space Station after 2024 and build its own orbital station. The United States and Russia have been the core stakeholders in the project, which has long been a symbol of cooperation between Washington, D.C. and Moscow after the Cold War. U.S. basketball superstar Brittany Griner's testifying today in a Russian courtroom as her trial continues. She's been jailed since February when she was arrested at the Moscow airport for possession of cannabis oil in her luggage. On Tuesday, Griner's legal team argued she had the cannabis oil for legitimate medical uses. A Russian narcologist was questioned by Griner's attorney, Maria Blagovolina.
Based on what you just have said, did we understand you correctly that a professional athlete suffering from chronic pain could have been prescribed medical cannabis in the U.S., for example, in the U.S. as a therapy?
I cannot testify for a doctor working in the United States because they have their own standards of diagnostics and treatment, but these types of treatments are prescribed. This is a fact.
The family of slain Palestinian-American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh is calling on the United States to launch an independent investigation into her killing. On Tuesday, 3 members of her family met with Secretary of State Tony Blinken at the State Department. The Al Jazeera correspondent was shot dead in the occupied West Bank while covering an Israeli military raid in the Jenin refugee camp. The United Nations, as well as numerous news organizations, have concluded she was shot by an Israeli soldier. Earlier this month, the U.S. said the bullet that killed her likely came from Israeli military gunfire, but stopped short of saying investigators had reached a definitive conclusion in her killing. The U.S. said her death was, quote, the result of tragic circumstances, unquote. Abu Akleh's family criticized the Biden administration's statement, saying, quote, for far too long, the United States has enabled Israel to kill with impunity by providing weapons, immunity, and diplomatic cover. Impunity leads to repetition. We're here to do our part to ensure that this cycle ends, they said. The director of the Federal Bureau of Prisons, Michael Carvajal, came under intense criticism during a Senate subcommittee hearing Tuesday examining the horrific conditions inside the federal penitentiary in Atlanta, Georgia, where at least 13 people have died by suicide since 2012. Georgia Senator John Ossoff, who chairs the permanent subcommittee on investigations, said the conditions inside the prison were, quote, abusive and inhumane.
Inmates hanging themselves in federal prisons, addicted to and high on drugs that flow into the facilities virtually openly. And as they hang and suffocate in the custody of the U.S. government, there's no urgent response from members of the staff. Year after year after year.
A former administrator at the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary, Terry Whitehead, also testified at Tuesday's Senate subcommittee hearing on conditions at the prison.
I was shocked and appalled by the USP Atlanta big picture. On a daily basis, there were numerous policy violations which put the staff, inmates, and the local community in danger. For example, there were so many rats inside the facility dining hall and food preparation areas that staff intentionally left doors open so the many stray cats that hung around the prison could catch the rats. It is never a good idea to leave prison doors open.
In other prison news, 28 women who were held in a county jail in Indiana have filed lawsuits over what's being described as a night of terror. The women say they were raped, groped, and assaulted by male prisoners inside the Clark County Jail after a jail official gave 2 male prisoners keys to the women's area in exchange for $1,000. The lawsuit also claims jail officials allowed the attack to go on for hours, even though it could be seen on surveillance video. 20 women filed a lawsuit in June. 8 more filed a lawsuit this week. And the Senate has voted to advance a bill to provide as much as $76 billion in corporate subsidies to companies making semiconductor chips in the United States. Senator Bernie Sanders said he supported expanding domestic microchip production, but opposed subsidizing the industry.
Should American taxpayers provide the microchip industry with a blank check of over $76 billion at the same exact time when semiconductor companies are making tens of billions of dollars in profits and paying their CEOs exorbitant compensation packages?
The truth is under attack almost every night by local underground ghouls, goblins, and spooky green witches who will terrorize you to get their way and hinder the facts. The only defense stronger than my tinfoil helmet is to flock under the rays of KFUG Community News. Every day at noon, listen in the safety of your own home from every couch worldwide. Witness just a drop the unbelievable on 101.1 FM and online at KFUGradio.org.
In local news, Jessica St. Andrews of the Wild Rivers Outpost is on vacation this week in Hawaii, but that hasn't stopped her from reporting local news. From Wild Rivers Outpost this morning, 4 Del Norte County supervisors on Tuesday agreed to let a rewritten initiative to repeal Measure R appear on the November 8th ballot. This decision comes about 3 months after county officials gave a report with the running theme that repealing the 1% sales tax measure would hurt recruitment and retention of county staff. On Tuesday, supervisors certified the results of a new petition that had a total of 417 valid signatures without discussion. District 5 Supervisor Susan Masson was absent. Authorized by Wesley Nunn, the petition states that Measure R passed by less than 1% of the vote. It argues that local businesses can't compete because Brookings, Oregon has no sales tax, and that citizen oversight committees merely rubber stamp. The petition also states that county employees didn't voluntarily reduce their salaries, even though other residents lost businesses, homes, and are struggling. In the past 3 years, Director Heidi Kunzel, Probation Officer Lonnie Raymond, and DA Katie Mix got increases between $30,000 and $50,000, while already making over a 6-figure income, Nunn stated. All are arguing to keep Measure R.
In April, county staff gave a presentation to supervisors on what would happen if Measure R was repealed. According to county staff, $748,700 went toward wage adjustments at the Del Norte County Sheriff's Office for juvenile hall and adult probation officers, investigators at the district attorney's office, and correctional staff at the jail. Measure R also paid for a new emergency dispatch system and a second records clerk position. Within the Community Development Department, $475,000 in Measure R dollars were budgeted for infrastructure and capital improvements, while $77,000 were used to hire a county planner. Measure R dollars were also used to hire a second code enforcement officer and another employee in the county's Office of Emergency Services. On Tuesday, Norma Williams, president of the Del Norte County Employees Association, called on leadership within the Sheriff's Employees Association and mid-management to join us in working to defeat these 2 ballot measures. She issued that same challenge to county employees across the board. This impacts all of us, she said. I'm asking county employees to stand up instead of sitting down, speak out instead of being silent, and advocate instead of being complacent and capitulating. A similar initiative repealing Measure S, the 1% sales tax Crescent City voters approved in 2020, is expected to appear on the November ballot. For KFUG Community News and Redwood Voice, I'm Monique Camarena.
And I'm Grant Merriweather. And also at yesterday's supervisor meeting, county supervisors withheld an endorsement of Del Norte Ambulance's efforts to obtain an exclusive operating agreement until an ad hoc committee could return with statistical data in addition to the anecdotal information provided about the company's performance. This request came from supervisors Chris Howard and Jerry Hemmingson, who said Tuesday that they felt recommending North Coast Emergency Medical Services approve a grandfathered agreement with Del Norte Ambulance was premature. Supervisor Howard expressed disappointment that the ad hoc committee, comprised of Supervisors Short and Starkey, had not gathered more hard statistical data. Del Norte Ambulance owner Ron Sandler criticized the ad hoc committee's report, stating that it lacked information about the emergency medical services system in Del Norte County. From the start, we felt we may not get a chance to speak to the committee to answer questions about EMS and ambulance services in Del Norte County, or even get a chance to clear up some misinformation or miscommunications, and definitely not a chance to talk about the good things we've done for our community and our first responders, Sandler told supervisors. In the 1970s, Del Norte County had poor ambulance services consisting of fly-by-night organizations, Sandler said, prompting it to issue an ordinance ensuring providers didn't just pop in and out as they choose. That ordinance was removed from the county code, Sandler said, leaving the contract the county has with Del Norte Ambulance as the only way to ensure everyone receives ambulance services. An exclusive operating agreement would prevent poor service from returning to the community, Sandler argued. Grandfathering an EOA is the safest and easiest way to ensure a stable EMS system with the highest standards and level of oversight, rate controls, checks and balances, he said. Starkey, however, told Sandler that Del Norte ambulance representatives were given a chance to respond to the report. She said she had an email sent to the company's general manager, John Pritchett, and its operations manager, Charles Tweed, inviting Del Norte Ambulance to be part of the entire process.
We invited you to provide us with a list of questions that we would be asking, as well as who you wanted to include for us to be interviewing, Starkey said. In March, Starkey and Short agreed to be on an ad hoc committee tasked with gathering objective information about Del Norte Ambulance's performance after North Coast EMS sought input from elected officials on whether it should grant exclusivity to the ambulance company. Under California Health and Safety Code 1797.200, emergency medical services can forego seeking competitive bids for an exclusive operating agreement if they've been operating continually since 1981. North Coast EMS, a joint powers authority overseeing ambulance services in Del Norte, Humboldt, and Lake counties, determined Del Norte Ambulances qualifies for the grandfathering process. If the Del Norte County Board of Supervisors endorsed Del Norte Ambulance's request, that recommendation is forwarded to North Coast EMS, which would develop a transportation plan that its board would have to approve. Following the discussion, both Hemmingson and Starkey said they were leaning toward exclusivity. However, Starkey suggested giving her and Short more time to gather statistical data in addition to the anecdotal information they gathered. Hemmingson also suggested that Starkey and Short work with the county administrators and Del Norte ambulance representatives to go over the company's existing contract with the county to see where we want to tweak it. I think this could be beneficial for everyone involved, Hemmingson said to an EOA with Del Norte Ambulance. Thanks to the vacationing Jessica St. Andrews on the Wild Rivers Outpost. Aloha. For KFUG Community News and Redwood Voice, I'm Monique Camarena.
And I'm Grant Merriweather. In a press release yesterday, Oregon's U.S. Senators Jeff Merkley and Ron Wyden announced the Smith River National Recreation Area Expansion Act, or the Smith River NRA. Legislation to expand the Smith River NRA cleared a key hurdle by passing it out of a Senate committee on a bipartisan vote. Expanding the Smith River NRA by 58,000 acres into Oregon would protect the diverse ecosystems of the rivers, streams, and adjacent lands of the North Fork Smith River watershed. The Smith River NRA expansion would permanently withdraw the land from new mining claims, helping to protect the sensitive area from proposed nickel strip mines and protect 75 miles of scenic rivers, including Baldface Creek, Crum Creek, and nearby streams. Additionally, the legislation would task the Forest Service with the preparation of an updated recreation plan, identifying specific plans for the entire national recreation area, and produce a special study of streams, fens, wetlands, and potentially unstable and vulnerable aquatic habitat areas. The bill complements the Southwestern Oregon Watershed and Salmon Protection Act, which was introduced by the senators earlier this year to protect the North Fork Smith River watershed and other southwestern Oregon rivers and streams. With KFUG Community News and Redwood Voice, I'm Grant Merriweather. You're listening to KFUG Community News.
And from the Lost Coast Outpost, in an accident that threatened the fragile ecosystem of Humboldt Bay, a fuel barge loaded with 1.68 million gallons of diesel collided with the South Jetty last month, damaging but not puncturing the vessel's outer steel hull. The United States Coast Guard has opened an investigation into the June 20th incident, and Petty Officer Andrew Kistner, confirmed that it did not result in a fuel spill. That's very good, he said, but the barge did sustain damage and is being repaired. The Coast Guard's investigation will look into casual factors, including information on the vessel, its crew, the weather, and other conditions, he said. According to an incident report from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Office of Response and Restoration, the tank barge Monterey Bay, owned and operated by the Oregon-based South Bros, was being towed out of the bar channel by the tugboat Apache when the aft hull of the barge contacted the entrance channel jetty. Kistner said this grounding happened at the far tip of the South Jetty, with the port side hull of the Monterey Bay connecting with the concrete delas beneath the waterline, causing a lesion in the outermost of two steel hulls. The Coast Guard quickly had a 47-foot lifeboat at the scene, and the crew was also able to confirm that the fuel tank had not been punctured, Kistner said. While disaster was avoided, the incident was enough to alarm local authorities concerning the possibility of totally screwing up Humboldt Bay. In a press release yesterday, Intrepid Boys Senator Mike McGuire shared plans to meet with the state fish and wildlife representatives and their Office of Oil Spill Prevention and Response in the coming days to talk about protocols and how all levels of government can work closer together, said McGuire. We're grateful to the Fish and Wildlife team for their work and look forward to diving deeper into this troubling incident, which could have been disastrous for the sensitive coastal environment and the aquaculture industry that farms bay waters. For KFUG Community News and Redwood Voice, I'm Monique Camarena.
And in a report from CalMatters today, under state law, every Californian has the right to safe, clean, affordable, and accessible water. But a blistering audit released Tuesday shows just how far the state is from turning that promise into a reality. Acting State Auditor Michael Tilden slammed regulators at the State Water Resources Control Board for what he characterized as their lack of urgency to provide needed assistance to failing water systems, even as the state funnels hundreds of millions of dollars into drinking water projects. The audit's key findings include many things, such as, for instance, more than 920,000 people face an increased risk of cancer and liver and kidney problems because they get drinking water from one of the more than 370 systems that did not meet water quality standards as of December 2021. More than 150 of those systems have failed to meet those standards for at least 5 years. And an additional 432 systems serving more than 1 million people are currently at risk of failing. The Golden State has roughly 7,400 drinking water systems, according to the report. Additionally, more than 2/3 of the failing water systems are located in low-income, disadvantaged communities, primarily in 8 Central Valley counties, San Bernardino County, and Imperial County, forcing residents who can least afford it to purchase more expensive bottled water for drinking and cooking purposes. And finally, although the State Water Board has funding available to help those systems improve their water quality, it took an average of 33 months in 2021 for systems to apply for and the board to award that money, nearly double the 17-month average in 2017. Tilden acknowledged the delays are partly due to a change in state law prompting the State Water Board to work with smaller, potentially less sophisticated water systems. But he noted that surveys of water systems also suggest the board's cumbersome application process is a factor. One respondent described it as a nightmare, saying no one can decipher what is required. Making matters worse, California is in the midst of a historic drought, which will only increase the strain on many struggling water systems, Tilden wrote. As their water quality worsens or their water dries up altogether, struggling water systems will urgently need funding and solutions from the State Water Board. Any delays will expose even more Californians to unsafe drinking water. Among Tilden's recommendation to the Water Board were that it trim unnecessary documents and steps from its application process and develop a way to fast-track projects deemed especially urgent. For KFUG Community News and with Redwood Voice, I'm Persephone Rose.
In sporting news, the Humboldt Crabs put together yet another dominating week as both the pitching staff and lineup were firing on all cylinders. The weekend was highlighted by a combined no-hitter from Crabs pitchers Nick Perryman and Eureka local Garrison Fink, which came not even a week after Caleb Ruiz threw his own complete game shutout. Pitching has been a strong point for the Crabs for much of the season, and with a deep bullpen to pull from in games, there's always a fresh arm waiting in the wings to close the door if needed. The Crabs pitching staff gave up only 10 runs in 5 games, while the offense combined for 46 runs, which allowed them to win all but one game. Get in on the minor league action this weekend as the Crabs take on the San Francisco Seals Friday and Saturday evenings and Sunday afternoon in Arcata.
Last week, one Gordon Pfeffer sat down with us in the KFUG Community Radio studio for an episode of Community Service. In this particular episode, Gordon Pfeffer speaks with KFUG Radio's Paul Kritz about the upcoming Crescent City Triathlon. From their page, for the past 35 years, plus 2 years from when they canceled for COVID, the Crescent City Sprint Triathlon has been enjoyed at the Fred and Dirt Municipal Pool in Crescent City, California. Over the years, an adult duathlon and a kids triathlon has been added. You will enjoy a small-town event, which draws participants from many states and nearby counties. Although a comfortable family event, competition often is high. But here to talk about it for himself is Gordon Pfeffer, one of the primary organizers for this event, along with KFUG Radio's Paul Kritz.
Describe the process. It's a sprint triathlon. It's not like the 100-mile Ironman thing or anything. This is about the shortest thing you can do and still be a triathlon, correct?
Oh, absolutely, Paul. You know what? This triathlon, it's pretty easy for most people to get into it and to be participants. The basic sprint triathlon consists of a 500-yard swim, which is 20 laps in the pool.
Okay.
Not too daunting. A 12-mile bike ride, and the bike ride runs a good part along Pebble Beach, so it's beautiful. And then we have a 3.1 mile run. So,
which is what, like a 5K? Is that what?
Yeah, it's basically a 5K. Wow. So it's for anybody that's in reasonably good shape, you can with some amount of training cross the finish line, which in any athletic event, that's what it's all about. Hey, you crossed the finish line, you are a winner.
You did it, exactly. Yeah. It was a lot of fun doing that. So and it starts with the swim, right? That's the first thing you do.
Yeah.
And then you jump out and you run out and you get all wet. You're all wet and you hop on your bike, right?
Oh, you do. Yeah. Generally, you put on, your shirt and a pair of shorts. Obviously, put on your shoes and off you're going. Yeah.
And how far was the bike? It's 11 plus miles.
12 miles.
12 mile.
Yeah.
I remember it going down. Does it change ever from year to year, or is the course the same?
I think it's basically the same. Where you head through the back streets up to Pebble Beach, along Pebble Beach, and if I remember correctly, it's down towards the high school. You hang a Yuli and you come on back.
And come back the way you came.
Yeah. And then the run is super awesome too, because it takes you along the new Harbor Trail for a good part of the run.
Where? How's the run? Where is that now? Where are you talking about?
I'm not all that familiar with that, Paul, but you basically take off and you run along over the new bridge along the RV park there out towards the harbor. And
wow, all right.
I couldn't tell you the exact course. That's not my department at this point.
No, but the fact that it's different, because it was just like a time and a half around Beachfront Park or something like that when I did it, or 2 times around. I forget what it ended up being, or 3 times. I forget what it was. But we just ran around the park for 3.1 miles. But this one will stretch out, and you'll go across Elk Creek toward the harbor and back.
Absolutely.
Right on.
One of the things that we hear from, especially out-of-town participants, is like, this is the most beautiful course that we have that they've ever been on. And, of course, as, local people around here, we get to enjoy and appreciate this all the time.
Right.
But when you're from out of the area, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm riding on the bluffs up above the ocean and running, along the bay and the harbor. Oh wow, they're thrilled about.
Join the Triathlon, August 21st, 2022, the 36 Crescent City Triathlon Duathlon. Again, that's on Thursday, August 21st, 2022, starting at 10:30. Details and applications at www.crescentcitytriathlon.com. For the full interview with Mr. Pfeffer, please tune in to KFUG Community Radio's YouTube channel for the full community service episode and much, much more. For KFUG Community Radio and with Redwood Voice, I am Persephone Corvid-Rose. Could you use assistance with your reading? How about assistance with basic computer skills like word processing, writing a resume, or setting up an email? Do you need help preparing for your GAD or HiSET? Are you learning English as a second language and would like to improve your reading, speaking, and listening skills? Del Norte Reads is here to help with all this and much more. Del Norte Reads is a grant and donation-funded nonprofit organization aimed at helping community members with all aspects of functional literacy. All our services are free, and we are more than happy to provide accommodations for a diverse group of learners. If you or someone you know could use our support, please call us at 707-464-7072 or stop by and see us in person at 1080 Mason Mall, Suite 9. More information is available at the main branch of the Del Norte County Library. Thanks, and we hope to see you soon.
You are listening to KFUG Community News.
Self-destruct initiated.
It's time for the Caltrans Road Bulletin. Please remember to watch for signs, drive slowly through construction areas, and follow the Caltrans workers' traffic directions. There's some pavement work going on from the 101-169 junction all the way to Klamath Yard starting on Friday the 22nd. Expect 10-minute delays. North of Klamath on 101 is some bridge work near Old Hunter Creek Road. That's another 10-minute delay or so. And rounding out the work happening on 101 south of Crescent City is the continuing Last Chance Grade project. They expect 25-minute delays for that one. And heading north towards Oregon, there's some spill cleanup work happening just north of Smith River. 199 has a few construction areas as well. They start near Kings Valley Road with one-way traffic and about 10-minute delays. Further down 199, there's some emergency work happening north of Hardscrabble Creek Bridge, just 5-minute delays there. And rounding out road work on 199, there's some culvert repairs between Monkey Creek Road and Oregon Mountain Road. Expect 10-minute delays there.
Help keep your community clean. For more than 30 years, the Caltrans Adopt a Highway program has been a successful public partnership with more than 120,000 Californians participating to clean and enhance state highways. This collaboration is expanding under the Clean California initiative to include volunteer incentives up to $250 a month. Rules and conditions apply. For details and to contact your local coordinator, visit cleanca.com. And thank you for keeping California clean.
I'm Dr. Anthony Lizowitz, and this is Climate Connections. New York is one of the largest dairy-producing states in the nation. It's home to more than 600,000 dairy cows. But Jennifer Whiteman, a senior extension associate at Cornell University, says cows create more than milk. They also produce methane, a climate-warming gas.
The majority of New York State agricultural emissions are methane.
Decomposing manure releases the gas. So do the microbes in the cow's gut as they break down grass and other plant material. The methane is then released to the atmosphere.
From, quite literally, the burps and farts of the cow.
But tweaking a cow's diet can cut those emissions by up to 40% according to some estimates. Providing feed that's easier to digest, adjusting the proportions of nutrients, and supplementing with certain additives can help reduce the methane produced. Whiteman says it also boosts milk production, because less of the energy contained in the feed goes to waste.
As you improve the feed efficiency of the cow, more of the feedstuffs go into producing milk, and less of the feedstuffs come out as methane.
So she says fine-tuning cows' diets can be a cost-effective way to maximize milk production and minimize climate pollution. Climate Connections is produced by the Yale Center for Environmental Communication. To hear more stories like this, visit climateconnections.org.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1918. That was the day miners' president Ginger Goodwin was shot dead in British Columbia. His murder sparked Canada's first general strike in Vancouver the following week. Goodwin had arrived in British Columbia 8 years earlier and found work in the Cumberland mines on Vancouver Island. He considered working conditions in the mines absolutely appalling and began advocating for safety and organizing miners. He was soon blacklisted after participating in a 2-year coal miners' strike for recognition on the island. he moved to Trail, British Columbia, where he emerged as a Socialist Party candidate in the 1916 election. He was also elected president of the International Union of Mine, Mill and Smelter Workers District 6, the vice president of British Columbia's Federation of Labor, and the head of the local Trades and Labor Council. He openly expressed his opposition to Canada's entry into the war, stating that workers were now employed in killing each other. He was found unfit for military duty after a medical exam. That was until he led a strike for the 8-hour day at Consolidated Mining and Smelting. It was the world's largest lead and zinc smelter and a key munitions producer during the war. His status was quickly changed to make him eligible for conscription. He fled to the Cumberland Hills, where he hid out for months to avoid the draft. And on this day, Goodwin was shot dead by a Dominion Police special constable. He was brought back to Cumberland, where thousands turned out for his funeral in a mile-long procession. The Vancouver labor movement was outraged by Goodwin's murder and called a one-day general strike on August 2nd to protest his killing. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
You're listening to KFUG Community News.
After more than 2 years, statewide eviction protections are over, and landlords will be allowed to bump up rents on some apartments by as much as 10% come August 1st, the maximum allowed under state law, thanks to ballooning inflation rates. As with any California housing crisis story, though, it's complicated. In some cities, the end of statewide eviction laws has meant the start of even stronger local protections, such as bans on evictions over non-payment of rent in Los Angeles and San Francisco. And if you're lucky enough to live in a rent-controlled unit in Los Angeles, which make up about 3/4 of the rental stock in that city, rent hikes are also prohibited until next summer. Confused? So are tenants and landlords. CalMatters' Manuela Tobias and Los Angeles Times' Liam Dillon, hosts of Gimme Shelter, the California Housing Crisis podcast, discuss how the rental market got to this confusing point and where it might go now.
So now on to the main topic of the episode, and that's how tenants and landlords are faring now, 2.5 years into the COVID-19 pandemic. Manuela, you've been tracking all these changes recently. Why don't you start, though, by reminding us what things were first like in March 2020 for housing when the pandemic began?
It was a really concerning time for a lot of reasons. As it relates to housing, given the massive and immediate economic catastrophe, particularly among low-income workers in restaurants, hotels, and other places that all closed down, there were huge worries that there could be a massive wave of evictions as people were unable to pay their rent. They were worried that an eviction spike would not only lead to a big increase in homelessness, but also the dislocation and moving around, further worsening the coronavirus health crisis.
Yeah, that was all very front of mind for a lot of people. And so what was the response?
So policymakers at all levels of government, local, state, federal, first moved to create a system of protections against rent increases and evictions. None of these ended up being ironclad, but some were pretty close, especially in California, when the court system at the beginning of the pandemic essentially stopped hearing eviction cases. Later on, the federal government, as part of its COVID relief packages, gave California more than $5 billion to pay tenants back rent to landlords.
Right, so there's a lot that's happened, and much of this began a really long time ago.
That's right. In fact, at midnight on June 30th, after 27 months, the final sliver of California's statewide protections expired for tenants against eviction over missed rent payments.
Okay, so what has happened over those past 27 months?
Yeah, so let's start with evictions. The state court system just put out a report documenting 36,000 eviction lawsuits filed between July 2020 and 2021 across California. Part of the reason could be that eviction in many places were still legal for reasons outside of that missed rent, like nuisances or health and safety issues.
So 36,000 sounds like kind of a fair amount, but how does that compare to like a non-COVID year?
So it's actually the 6th year of declines in eviction lawsuits. Between 2018 and 2019, that was the last full non-COVID year,
Right.
landlords filed 129,000 complaints, about 3.5 times as many. But to be clear, this data is only a partial view of evictions. While these are court-filed evictions, we don't necessarily know their results, and it's nearly impossible to track the many disputes that are settled outside of the courthouse, such as tenants who leave when their landlord first posts a notice or can no longer afford the rent going forward.
Okay, yeah, but still, it sounds like the eviction protection has had, quite an impact on the situation, and those billions of dollars in COVID aid from the federal government seemed to play a big role as well, didn't they?
Yeah, that's a huge part of this, rent relief. Using $5.4 billion total from the federal government and even more authorized by the state to cover remaining expenses, the state and local governments launched rent relief programs to help people cover missed rent and utility payments. The biggest program was the state's Housing is Key program, which accepted applications between March 2021 and March 2022 to cover up to 18 months of full missed rent, in addition to utilities for people who were hit by the pandemic and made below a certain income.
Okay.
It's been run by the state housing department through a contractor and so far has helped more than 340,000 families pay back rent to the tune of $4 billion.
Okay, so we already talked about these big eviction bans, but there are also some court protections tied to this program too, weren't there?
So the big protections against eviction over missed rent expired in September of last year, but protections remained for people who had applied to this program, basically telling landlords if your tenant applied for relief and they're waiting to hear back or waiting to get paid, which many people faced months-long delays, you're not allowed to file an eviction case against them.
Okay, and that's what ended June 30th.
Exactly.
Okay, so I know from both your coverage and from others, this program, while it seems to have certainly given out a lot of money, has not entirely been smooth sailing though, right?
No. Since the start, tenants with poor internet access and who spoke languages other than English reported issues getting help, and it's taken tenants, as I mentioned, months to access assistance. Tenant organizations have sued the state twice over this program. The more recent lawsuit alleged that people were getting denied rent relief without a proper explanation, or saying they were unresponsive when they hadn't reached out to the applicant, for example, in their preferred language. An Alameda County Superior Court judge ruled this month that the housing department has to stop denying applications, thousands of which are still pending, and suspend as many as 100,000 recent denials while the court reviews their case.
Okay, so clearly a lot still going on here. What else?
Yeah, so while the court can no longer stop a landlord with one of these pending applications from filing an eviction, since that expired on June 30th, tenant lawyers say that having a pending application can still be used as a defense in court. But that's hard to prove, especially when getting legal aid is really rare among tenants who are nationally represented in about 1 of every 10 eviction cases, and even less in some parts of California. And in the most recent twist, the Sacramento Bee reported about 5,000 households who got rent relief from the state were asked to give the money back, sometimes without much of an explanation.
So what is the state saying? Anything about what's going on with that?
So the state attributes those clawbacks to reasons including overpayment, renters allegedly withholding funds from their landlords, and fraudulent activity. But the lawyers suing on behalf of tenants say that these retroactive denials are outrageous and unfair because this is money that people have already gotten and no longer really have to pay back.
I see. Okay, so we mentioned at the top that a lot of these patchwork of eviction protections that we've been describing that have been in place during the pandemic have gotten even patchier. And I guess this relates to what local governments may be doing. What's going on under the state?
Now that the overall state rules have gone away, some cities and counties still have their own. As an aside, there was some back and forth in the legislature about whether or not cities were allowed to institute their own local rules.
I see.
But now that the state protections have gone away, some of these cities and counties have authorized new rules.
Okay, so like where?
San Francisco, for example, landlords are prohibited from evicting any tenant, regardless of income, for non-payment of rent that came due on or after July 1st, 2022. and was not paid due to pandemic-related hardship. However, if that tenant owes rent from before July 1st, they're actually not protected because the state law preempted that.
Okay, so this is getting very complicated, and my head, which listeners cannot see, but you can on the Zoom, Manuela, you can see is spinning around a little bit.
I'm very privileged to see the spinning. Yeah, Liam. And you've written about the situation in LA too. Like, what's happening down there?
Right. So both the city of Los Angeles and the rest of the county have their own anti-eviction rules now across LA County. Low-income tenants, these are defined as those making $95,000 roughly or less for a family of four, are still protected from eviction going forward if they can't pay their rent. In LA City, though, these anti-eviction protections apply to everybody still.
What about rent increases?
So in the city of Los Angeles and unincorporated parts of the county, rent increases are prohibited for apartments that are under rent control. So in the city, that's about 3/4 of the rental stock, apartments built before October 1978. And in fact, this prohibition against rent increases in the city has been in place since the beginning of the pandemic and isn't set to expire until a year after the COVID emergency is declared over. This, as we know, is still going on. So as it stands now, still no rent increases for these properties in the city until at least next summer.
Wow. And that's 3/4 of the rental stock.
In the city, yeah. And that's something in my research, that city policy has been the most aggressive in favor of tenants anywhere in the country. Although now some city council members seem to be taking a look at whether they should begin to dial these rules back down.
But what if I'm not lucky enough to live in a rent-controlled apartment in LA?
So there is supposed to be another state law that protects against exorbitant rent increases. This has actually been in place for a few years now, and it limits annual rent hikes in properties that are older than 15 years, so 2007 and older for now, to 5% plus inflation.
Okay, so that's AB 1482, right?
Yes, and in fact, again, the Gimme Shelter heads out there will remember lots of discussions about this bill when it became law in 2019.
So with the inflation that we're facing now, this actually doesn't sound so good.
Right, and it is not, at least for tenants. In fact, because inflation is so high everywhere in the state, starting August 1st, landlords will be allowed to increase rent for the millions of properties covered by this law by as much as 10%, which was the maximum complicated when the law was first passed.
Wow. So we've got different eviction rules in different places, some places with no rent increases at all, some with double-digit rent increases. It's definitely hard to keep this straight.
Indeed it is, but you and I really are trying our best to help people through this.
We're trying.
You're listening to KFUG Community News.
Hi, my name is Dr. Mark Alderi, and I'm an infectious diseases specialist in New Orleans.
Hi, my name is Hope Hickerson, and I'm a health education specialist and reporter. This is the Noise Filter Podcast, where an infectious diseases physician,
that's me, and a health education expert,
that's me, talk about what you need to know to keep yourself and your loved ones healthy.
For more information about Noise Filter, your public health podcast, and to watch and share our incredible informative animations, please visit us at noisefiltershow.com.
And if you like what you hear, don't forget to leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to us. So, let's get started.
Urgent need for antibiotic innovation. As the problem of antibiotic resistance grows, the WHO, the World Health Organization, is emphasizing the urgent need for antibiotic innovation. Antimicrobial resistance is quickly increasing and is one of the most pressing public health issues. According to the CDC, over 3 million antibiotic-resistant illnesses occur in the United States each year.
Antimicrobial resistance, or AMR, refers to the capacity of microbes, such as bacteria, to withstand medications meant to destroy them. One of the primary causes of resistance is the widespread overuse of antibiotics. Unfortunately, antibiotics are becoming less effective in treating infections, and infections are becoming more difficult to cure.
For an antibiotic to reach a patient for treatment, it follows a very complex process, which usually takes about 10 to 15 years. Only 1 out of every 30 new antibiotics actually goes through a clinical trial that eventually reaches and treats patients. According to the WHO's annual report, there have been 27 new antibiotics that have reached clinical development in 2021 against priority pathogens such as TB, Salmonella, Staphylococcus, and Enterobacter. So that's really, really important, Hope. I can't tell you how important having more options to treat those organisms are. These are very, very problematic, and that's a very small list of the problematic organisms that I see when I'm in the hospital doing infectious diseases rounds and having to kind of MacGyver my way sometimes through antibiotics just because there's just such resistance that exists.
My goodness. The pandemic has also caused slow progress and delays in clinical trials. Additionally, small and medium-sized companies working towards creating new antibiotics are struggling to find investors to assist with financing from the late-stage clinical development until approval from the regulators.
Therefore, there's an urgent need for innovation and funding to increase antibiotic products. The World Health Organization emphasizes that countries need to come together and work together to find sustainable solutions and incentives for research, development, innovation, and to create a viable ecosystem for antibiotics. So the issue here, Hope, is this. Pharmaceuticals have stopped producing antibiotics somewhere in the late 80s and started to, especially when they realized that medications like HIV medications, hypertension, diabetes are medications that you're going to be taking for the rest of your life. So if you were a CEO of a company, would you make something that, you would only take for 5 days or 10 days, as opposed to somebody who's going to be taking an HIV medication for the rest of their lives? So it makes more fiscal sense. And again, because we live in a society that's dictated by hyper consumerism and hyper capitalism, what happened was that pharmaceuticals had no financial incentive to continue making antibiotics. So they stopped the production of antibiotics, or they stopped innovating to find new antibiotics. And as a result of that, the government has had to try to induce American pharmaceuticals to create new antimicrobials by creating tax incentives and other such things. But it hasn't been as successful as we would like it to be. But this is a crisis. Now, the other issue at hand, too, that's equally as problematic and shocking, because we can't do anything about it, is that there are antimicrobials in the food feed for animals that are transferred directly from animals to humans through the meat that humans eat. So if there is antibiotics in food feed, because the condition that animals live in are so horrific. Now, we don't know why, but antibiotics in food feed act as a growth promoter in animals. I also suspect that the horrific conditions the animals are oftentimes kept in, the antibiotics benefit the animals from that perspective as well. But the issue here is this, is that if you're putting antibiotics in food feed so that you can get, because again, if you're a CEO and if you can get a chicken to the market at 45 days rather than 60 days, the law dictates that you have to go down that pathway, because there's a fiduciary responsibility to your shareholders that you're going to increase profits at every step of the way. And CEOs who have not done that have been sued by their shareholders before. So you have a fiscal responsibility to kind of, in this example, to get that chicken to market from 60 days to 45 days. And if using antibiotics are the way to do it, so be it. Because we live in a society where we privatize the gains and we socialize the losses. And this is a great example of how the profits have been privatized. So you're using an antibiotic, great, you're getting that chicken to market in 45 days rather than 60 days. But, oh, well, what's going to happen? Well, somewhere down the line, there's going to be antibiotic resistance in organisms that are going to affect human beings. But that point, by that time, it is so far removed from your hands that, and we can look at this privatized profits and socialized losses in almost all aspects of the American capitalistic society. Of course, we've been talking about food all day and different stories we've been reading, a lot of the food processing type stuff. Again, people add high fructose corn syrup. It makes their food better. it's processed, it tastes better. So they get the profits off of that. But in 20 years, we have a rash of diabetes, right? Same thing with extraction of fossil fuels as well. We're going to remove fossil fuels from the ground, despite us having renewables all around us. That is a much cleaner form of energy. Doesn't matter because the system's already in place for us to extract these fossil fuels. They get the profits and we suffer the consequences. And right now, as we're recording this, Europe is it's almost funny that they're having 40 Celsius days. And we're like, that's like Tuesday in New Orleans. But to their credit, they have no air conditioning. Right. I mean, imagine the heat that you and I live in and not having air conditioning.
I know. No.
It's brutal.
It's brutal. Yeah. I've read somewhere that the bridges and streets are buckling because of the heat. Like they are just not equipped for it at all.
And again, of course, this is all a function of climate change. And we see the effects and we just whistle past the graveyard.
Ooh. How do you look and you see devastation and you just go on your vacations like millions and billions and generations of people aren't going to be affected? I just don't understand it.
The generations that are going to come after us, Hope, are going to look at us and hate us.
I hope so. Honestly, I hope so. So it won't get repeated. Stuff continues to happen and keeps getting repeated. So I hope generations after us get to a point where they're like, okay.
They're going to hate us because they're going to be like, so you knew you were doing this bad?
You knew.
I refer to us as being in the dark ages. See, the people who were in the dark ages didn't realize that they were in the dark ages.
Right.
We're in the dark ages because we know that we are in the dark ages and we're not doing anything about it. It was one thing not to know. But if you know that what you're doing is bad and you're still not doing anything about it, shame on us.
Shame on us. Thanks for listening to Noise Filter, your public health podcast.
Be sure to subscribe to the Noise Filter podcast, follow us on social media, and leave us a review letting us know your favorite part of the show.
You can find me, Hope Hickerson, at hopehickerson.com.
And you can find me at Dr. Mark Allen Derry or at the Dr. Derry. That's DRDERY.
To see and share our amazing animations and find out more information about us, the show, as well as links to our social media, go to noisefiltershow.com.
We are grateful to our sponsors, including Access Health Louisiana and the End the Epidemic Initiative, who are working to bring equitable health outcomes to everyone they serve. Hope, any last words?
Stay well out there, folks, and continue taking steps to keep yourself and your loved ones healthy. That includes exercise, a good diet, getting adequate sleep, and seeing your healthcare providers regularly.
And protect yourself and others by getting the COVID-19 vaccine and booster, wearing a mask, and social distancing wherever possible. Remember, health is a human right.
You are listening to KFUG, Crescent City 101.1 FM, and online at kfugradio.org. Community radio for Crescent City and beyond. It's KFUG.
The moon has served as muse for countless numbers of poets, from the unnamed and unknown to Shelley, Dickinson, and Kerouac.
The moon, her magic bee, big sad face of infinity.
But only one of these had to worry about record label execs. You're on the Soundbeat. You're listening to Jack Kerouac reading his poem, The Moon, Her Majesty, on Dot Records, Poetry for the Beat Generation, with piano accompaniment by Steve Allen. The recording is significant in that it was released and then immediately recalled after a label exec heard the content and Kerouac's, let's say, state of mind. The recall letter came from Bernice Mason. You will receive a Dot album titled Poetry for the Beat Generation. Dot has canceled the release of the album for obvious reasons. Please do not review it on your publications. Thank you for your cooperation.
Deep as the ocean, high as the moon, low as the lowliest river lagoon. fish in the tar and pull in the spar.
130 copies are believed to have escaped the recall, and this is one of them. Soundbeat is produced at the Belfer Audio Archive, Syracuse University Libraries. I'm Brett Barry.
You're listening to KFUG Community News.
That's all for KFUG Community News for Wednesday, July 27th, 2022. Weather for today, partly cloudy skies will become mostly cloudy tonight and remain so tomorrow. High of 59 today, low tonight 53, high tomorrow another 59 degrees. Winds will be light and variable out of the west-southwest. For KFUG Community Radio, I'm Paul Kritz.
You may find yourself